Secretary Hegseth, tomorrow is 2 months since the war has begun. You've testified that it was $25 billion in cost in terms of the munitions we used and what we paid for it. But when you add to that the damage that was done to our bases and today's dollars for buying replacement munitions and replacement aircrafts, what has the total cost been over the last 60 days?
That number right now reflects the total cost that we're seeing.
Including buying in today's dollars the new weapons and replacements, and including the damage there? That's your testimony?
If there's adjustments to that, I would defer to the comptroller on that.
And how much are you seeing in terms of, are you asking in terms of supplemental funding just for the Iran mission from this committee?
If and when a supplemental is submitted,
how much?
The majority of it would not just be for,
But what would be the ballpark for Iran?
Munitions related to the entirety
Just
of what
number,
we want to
sir.
get done.
A number, what would you submit?
All right, folks, welcome to Jack Mockler. Once again, Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff and longtime loyalist, has flipped, testifying under oath with emails, texts, and notes that prosecutors say are so damning they justify prison time for Trump. The testimony is being called the most devastating insider account ever given against a former president. This is not speculation. This is not political theater. This is a former White House chief of staff providing detailed, sworn testimony about criminal conspiracies, obstruction of justice, and a coordinated effort to subvert American democracy. Meadows didn't just offer vague recollections or general impressions. He described specific meetings, specific phone calls, specific conversations where Trump personally directed illegal activities. He provided prosecutors with documentary evidence that backs up every word of his testimony.
It would be within on Iran, it would be less than $25 billion, but there's a lot more we would ask for beyond just Iran.
You're saying it's $25 billion. Okay, I would just, if you come back, you want to revise those numbers, because all the experts are disagreeing with you when it comes to today's dollars and damage, but you can revise it. How much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike to the Iranian school where kids were killed? Do you have that number in terms of the missiles we used?
As I've said, that unfortunate situation remains under investigation.
You don't know how much it costs the taxpayer?
But I wouldn't tie a cost to that, to anything.
It's a reasonable question, no, sir? I mean, our taxpayer money was going there. Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not.
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir. But let me.
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
And he confirmed that Trump was repeatedly told by multiple people, including his own lawyers, that the election fraud claims were false, that the fake elector scheme was illegal, and that pressuring officials to change results was criminal. Trump knew, according to Meadows, and he did it anyway. That's the kind of testimony that wins criminal cases. That's the kind of testimony that puts people in prison. And that's exactly what prosecutors are now seeking for Donald Trump. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. For years, Trump has managed to avoid serious legal consequences through a combination of political power, legal maneuvering, and the simple fact that no one close enough to him was willing to testify against him. His inner circle remained loyal, refusing to cooperate with investigations, taking the Fifth Amendment, or simply stonewalling Congress. But that wall of silence has now been breached, and the person who breached it was one of the most important figures in Trump's entire operation.
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than
Yeah, but
what the previous
but to
administration did to our
acknowledge that-
economy,
to acknowledge
what the
there's a
previous
cost.
administration
You-
did
you
with
don't even
inflation,
know what the- you know
what
what's
the previous
upsetting? I reclaim
administration
my
did with
time. You know,
COVID,
Secretary-
and you're going to
Secretary,
lecture this
I reclaim
administration
my
about
time,
the
sir.
economy?
You know what is upsetting to me?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence. It's the incompetence. Let me ask you this. Certainly, maybe here we'll find agreement. There were still 440 pounds of low-enriched uranium, correct, when President Obama, after the JCPOA? Is that accurate?
Meadows wasn't some peripheral aide who occasionally saw things. He was the chief of staff, the person who controlled access to the president, who was in every meeting, who knew every secret. He was Trump's right-hand man, and now he's the prosecution's star witness. The testimony that Meadows delivered covers virtually every aspect of the post-election conspiracy. He described Trump's pressure campaign on state officials in unprecedented detail, confirming that he personally arranged phone calls to secretaries of state and other officials where Trump demanded they change vote counts or refuse to certify results. The infamous Georgia call where Trump told Brad Raffensperger to find the exact number of votes needed to flip the state, Meadows confirmed that he set that call up at Trump's specific direction, knowing exactly what Trump intended to do. That's premeditation. That's intent. That's not a frustrated president venting to a friend.
The amounts and types are classified.
Okay. Will you acknowledge that there were 970 pounds of uranium enriched after Trump tore up the JCPOA?
The JCPOA was a terrible deal that allowed Iran a path to a nuclear bomb.
You deal with vague platitudes. I'm asking you about numbers. Like you don't know what gas costs, you don't know what food costs, you don't know what the operation costs. You know, I get sound bites, but how about numbers? Do you know how much the enriched uranium was after you ripped up the JCPOA? Trump did.
I'll give you a number. I know that, as was stated by early on, the price of gas is twice as expensive in California, your home state, as anywhere else in the country because of the horrible policies your state pursued.
You know what? It used to be that that type of stuff worked, and then you started to lose the people that you campaigned you wanted to be for, because you said you wouldn't get us into bad wars. You said you would bring down the prices. You know what I'm sad for? I'm sad for all the people who voted for Trump. I'm sad for them because you betrayed them. You betrayed a lot of that MAGA base. And you know who knows that? J.D. Vance knows that.
That's a coordinated effort to pressure an official into committing election fraud. But the Georgia call was just the beginning. Meadows testified about similar calls to officials in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all the swing states where Trump lost. He described White House strategy sessions where Trump and his team would plan which officials to target and what pressure tactics to use. He provided emails and notes from those meetings that prosecutors are now using to build their case. And he confirmed that Trump was told repeatedly that these efforts were illegal, that his claims of fraud were baseless, and that his actions could result in criminal charges. Trump didn't care, according to Meadows. He pushed forward anyway, determined to overturn the election by any means necessary. The fake elector scheme also featured prominently in Meadows' testimony. This was one of the most bizarre and illegal parts of the entire conspiracy. A plan to create fraudulent slates of electors in states Biden won and submit them to Congress as if they were legitimate. Meadows testified that he received communications about this scheme, forwarded them to other officials, and discussed it with Trump multiple times. He confirmed that Trump knew these weren't real electors, knew they had no legal standing, but wanted to proceed anyway as a way to disrupt the certification process. And critically, Meadows testified that Trump was warned by multiple lawyers that this scheme was illegal. White House counsel said, "Don't do it." Outside attorneys said it wouldn't work. Even some of Trump's own team members said it was a terrible idea. Trump ignored them all and found lawyers who would tell him what he wanted to hear. That's not a president acting in good faith. That's a president knowingly breaking the law. The testimony about January 6th itself is perhaps the most damaging. Meadows confirmed that Trump was involved in planning the rally that preceded the attack on the Capitol, that Trump knew some of the attendees were angry and potentially violent, and that Trump wanted them to go to the Capitol anyway. When the riot began and people started calling for Trump to tell the mob to stand down, Meadows testified that Trump resisted. He didn't want to tell them to leave. He thought maybe the chaos would somehow stop or delay the certification. That's not just negligence. That's not just poor judgment. That's a president actively encouraging violence for political purposes. And if prosecutors can prove that, it's one of the most serious crimes a president can commit. The documentary evidence Meadows provided is what makes his testimony so powerful. This isn't just one person's word against another. Meadows turned over text messages, emails, meeting notes, phone records, and internal documents that corroborate everything he said. A 51-page congressional report that cites his cooperation describes his records as the most detailed insider account of Trump's actions during this period. Prosecutors are calling it a roadmap to Trump's criminal conspiracy. Defense attorneys are calling it a nightmare. Because when you have documentary evidence backing up insider testimony, it's incredibly hard to argue that the witness is lying or mistaken. The documents speak for themselves. Why did Meadows flip? That's the question everyone's asking. This was a guy who was completely loyal to Trump for years, who refused to testify for the January 6th committee, who faced contempt charges rather than cooperate. What changed? Several things, according to reports. First, Meadows was facing serious legal jeopardy himself. He was named as a co-conspirator in multiple indictments and was looking at potential jail time. Prosecutors offered him a deal, cooperate fully, and will consider leniency. That's standard practice in criminal cases. Flip the lower-level players to get the boss. And Meadows apparently decided that loyalty to Trump wasn't worth spending years in prison. Second, Trump himself hasn't been particularly loyal to former allies who've gotten in legal trouble. He's thrown people under the bus, distanced himself from them, claimed he barely knew them even when they worked closely with him for years. Meadows probably saw that pattern and realized Trump wasn't going to protect him. When it came down to it, Trump would sacrifice anyone to save himself. And third, there are reports that Meadows came to believe what they did was actually wrong. That might sound naive given everything that happened, but according to people close to him, Meadows has expressed genuine regret about his role in the post-election period. Whether that's moral reflection or legal strategy, the result is the same. Meadows is cooperating and providing devastating testimony against his former boss. Prosecutors are being very explicit about what they want as a result of this testimony. They're arguing in court filings that Trump should face incarceration, not fines, not probation, not house arrest, actual prison time. And they're basing that argument on the gravity of the offenses Meadows has described. Attempting to overturn a presidential election through illegal means, pressuring officials to violate the law, organizing a conspiracy involving fake electors, encouraging violence to stop the peaceful transfer of power. These are attacks on the foundation of American democracy, prosecutors argue. And someone who commits crimes that serious, especially someone who was president and should have known better, deserves the most serious punishment available. That's a strong position for prosecutors to take, and the fact that they're taking it tells you how confident they are in the evidence. Trump's response has been predictably furious. He's attacked Meadows as a liar and a traitor on Truth Social, claiming the testimony is fake and politically motivated. He's argued that Meadows is making things up to get a better deal for himself. He's insisted that even if the things Meadows describes happened, they weren't illegal because Trump believed he was fighting election fraud. But here's the problem with that defense. Meadows is testifying that Trump was told repeatedly that the election fraud claims were false. So Trump can't claim he genuinely believed it when his own chief of staff says under oath that Trump was informed the claims were bogus. The ignorance defense doesn't work when there's testimony proving you had knowledge. And the good faith defense doesn't work when there's evidence you knew what you were doing was wrong. Legal experts are saying this is the strongest case prosecutors have ever had against Trump. Stronger than the classified documents case, stronger than the hush money case, stronger than any of the civil cases, because this one has an insider witness who was involved in everything, who kept detailed records, and who's now cooperating fully. The timing of all this is also incredibly significant. The testimony is coming as Trump is dealing with multiple other legal challenges. The impeachment articles we discussed, the court sanctions against his lawyers, and now this testimony threatening jail time. It's all hitting at once, creating a perfect storm of legal jeopardy. And if prosecutors believe Meadows' testimony and the evidence he's provided, they're going to use it not just in one case, but in multiple cases. The Georgia election interference case, the federal January 6th case, potentially other state-level prosecutions. Meadows' testimony is relevant to all of them because it all stems from the same post-election conduct. So Trump could be facing trials in multiple jurisdictions, all using the same devastating testimony from his former chief of staff. That's not just one legal problem. That's a cascade of legal problems that could keep him in courtrooms for years. The possibility of Trump actually going to jail just became very real. Up until now, a lot of people assumed that even if Trump got convicted of something, he'd probably avoid prison time because he's a former president and there'd be huge logistical issues with incarcerating him. But prosecutors are explicitly arguing for jail time, and if judges agree, we could actually see Trump sentenced to prison. What would that look like? He'd probably be in some kind of special facility given his Secret Service protection, but he'd still be incarcerated. He'd still lose his freedom, and that would be absolutely unprecedented in American history. We've never had a former president go to jail. We've never had a sitting president be convicted of crimes committed while in office. This would be breaking entirely new ground. And if Trump is incarcerated during his second term, what happens to the presidency? Does he govern from jail? Does the vice president take over? Does the cabinet invoke the 25th Amendment saying he's unable to discharge the duties of the office? These are constitutional questions that have never been tested because this situation has never happened before. It would be absolute chaos. The government would be in crisis, international allies would be freaking out, markets would be going crazy. It would be the biggest political and constitutional crisis in modern American history. And we're potentially heading toward that scenario because of Mark Meadows' testimony. The political fallout from this is going to be enormous. Trump's base is going to see Meadows as the ultimate traitor. He was supposed to be loyal, he was part of the inner circle, and he flipped and cooperated with what they see as a corrupt justice system. They're going to hate Meadows more than they hate any Democrat. There will be death threats, calls for violence against him. He's going to need security for the rest of his life. On the other hand, Trump's opponents are going to see this as vindication. They've been saying for years that Trump tried to steal the election and that everyone around him knew it. Now they have Trump's own chief of staff confirming it under oath. That's going to energize Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans, make them more confident that Trump can actually be held accountable. For Republican politicians, this creates an impossible situation. Do they continue defending Trump even as his own chief of staff testifies that he committed crimes? Or do they start distancing themselves and risk losing Trump's base? Most are probably going to try to avoid commenting, saying it's a legal matter that should be resolved in court. But that's going to be harder and harder as more details come out. At some point, they're going to be forced to take a position, and whatever position they take is going to alienate somebody. That's the political reality. For years, there's been this debate about whether presidents and former presidents can really be held accountable for crimes or whether they're effectively above the law. Trump has certainly acted like he's above the law, defying subpoenas, ignoring court orders, claiming immunity from everything. And for a while, it seemed like he might be right, like the system couldn't actually touch him. But Meadows' testimony changes that. It provides the evidence needed to potentially convict Trump and send him to jail. If that happens, it sends a powerful message that no one is above the law, not even presidents. It affirms that our system of justice applies to everyone equally. That's crucial for the long-term health of our democracy. But if Trump is convicted based on Meadows' testimony and then manages to avoid consequences through appeals or political intervention, that sends the opposite message. It says that the powerful can commit crimes and get away with it as long as they have enough political support. That would be devastating for public trust in institutions and for the principle of equal justice under law. So the stakes here go way beyond Trump personally. This is about whether our system works the way it's supposed to, and we're about to find out. Meadows' testimony has already been given, but the trials based on that testimony are still upcoming. The Georgia case has been moving slowly through the courts with various procedural battles. The federal case has its own timeline, and there are appeals and motions that could delay things further. We're probably not going to see final verdicts for many months, maybe even into the next year. But the testimony is out there now, prosecutors have it, and they're going to use it to build their cases. Trump's lawyers are going to try to discredit Meadows, to argue that he's lying to save himself, to find inconsistencies in his testimony. That's all standard defense strategy. But the reality is, when you have the defendant's chief of staff testifying against him with documentary evidence backing it up, that's really hard to overcome. One thing to watch for is whether other Trump allies follow Meadows' lead and start cooperating. Once one person flips and gets a deal, others often follow because they realize their loyalty isn't being rewarded and they don't want to go down with the ship. We might see more former Trump officials coming forward with testimony and evidence. That would make the case against Trump even stronger and make it even harder for him to claim everyone is lying. It would establish a pattern where multiple independent witnesses are all saying the same thing, and that's really hard to defend against in court. The idea that a former president might actually go to jail based on testimony from his own chief of staff is wild. It's unprecedented. It's the kind of thing that seems like it belongs in a movie rather than real life. But it's happening. It's real. And over the next several months, we're going to watch this play out in courtrooms across the country. We're going to see prosecutors make their case using Meadows' testimony, see Trump's lawyers fight back and try to discredit him, see judges make rulings on admissibility of evidence and legal theories. And eventually, we're going to see verdicts that could determine whether Trump spends time behind bars. This is the story that could finally answer the question that's been hanging over American politics for years. Can Trump be held accountable, or is he untouchable? Mark Meadows' testimony suggests that accountability is possible, that the evidence exists to prove Trump committed serious crimes, and that prosecutors are willing to pursue the strongest possible penalties, including incarceration. Whether that actually happens remains to be seen, but the possibility is now very real in a way it wasn't before. Every piece of evidence Meadows has provided points in the same direction. Trump knew the election wasn't stolen. Trump knew his fraud claims were false. Trump knew the fake elector scheme was illegal. Trump knew pressuring officials to change results was criminal, and Trump did all of it anyway, determined to hold on to power by any means necessary. That's not a president fighting for what he believes is right. That's a president committing crimes to stay in office, and for that, according to prosecutors, he deserves to go to jail. The legal system is now moving forward with the most powerful evidence it has ever had against a former president. The trials will come, the verdicts will be delivered, and we will finally see whether the system can hold a president accountable for crimes committed while in office. Mark Meadows, the loyal chief of staff, the man who stood by Trump through everything, has made that possible. He flipped. He testified. He provided the evidence. And now Trump faces the most serious legal jeopardy of his life. The walls are closing in, and this time, there might not be an escape route. This is the story that changes everything, and we're just getting started.